When's the last time you can recall Georgia getting held to only 10 points on offense? You got to go back 8 years ago to 2016 when Kirby Smart was fresh in Athens, Georgia. As the last time Georgia was held to 10 points on offense. And this is the first time since 2020, 4 years, since Georgia has had 2 losses in the regular season. And this is a signature win for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin because Ole Miss just completely bullied Georgia. They was tossing Georgia around like a cold salad. Ole Miss defensive line, all those guys that they brought in on the interior of that unit in the transfer portal, that was money well spent because they were wreaking havoc against Georgia all afternoon. They had 5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. Carson Beck was getting harassed all afternoon, running for his life, and your defensive line was so dominant in this game that you scared the hell out of Georgia's offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, to the point where he was scared to throw anything that was past 10 yards downfield. All he wanted to call was bubble screens and short passes because Georgia's offensive line just couldn't stop Ole Miss defensive line from getting to Carson Beck. It seems like every time Carson Beck snapped the football, somebody was in his face about to crash him to the ground. And not only was Ole Miss pass rush really good, but their secondary was shut down today. They completely shut down all of Georgia's receivers. And Georgia doesn't have a bad group of receivers. You do have some talented guys in that receiver room, but they are inconsistent when it comes to catching passes. You saw a couple of drops in this game. And Carson Beck had nowhere to go with the football a lot of times. And Georgia also got held to only 59 rushing yards. And this just was a complete nightmare performance out of Kirby Smart's offense. You couldn't run the ball. You couldn't throw the ball. It just was a disaster. And Georgia had 10 drives in this game. They only scored on 2 out of 10 of those possessions. And one of those touchdowns, the one that they scored in the first quarter, only happened because of the Jackson Dart interception that he threw. If it wasn't for that interception and Georgia was forced to have to drive the length of the field to score, they probably only scored 3 points in this game. The offense was as bad as what I've ever seen out of Georgia. Hell, on their last 4 possessions, crunch time, which is when Georgia normally plays their best football, they had a fumble, an interception, another fumble, and a turnover on downs to close the game. They didn't have more than 2 plays in this matchup that went for more than 20 yards. Ole Miss just completely scared Georgia offensively in this game. They were scared to be aggressive. They were scared to take shots. This was a well-coached game by Pete Golding because Pete Golding, I didn't really know how good he was going to be when he left Alabama for Ole Miss. Most of the time, if you're a good assistant or a good coordinator, you're not leaving Nick Saban. You're going to get a head coaching job. So with how bad Ole Miss defense was last year, I had my fair share of reservations about Pete Golding. But this was a spectacular game that he called. Mike Bobo and Carson Beck, they just looked shell-shocked on that sideline. It looked like how Georgia looked defensively last year when Ole Miss played them. But the roles were somewhat reversed. Like, Ole Miss were just tossing these guys around like they were rag dolls. And it shows you that Georgia is no longer the team that we thought they were coming into this season. If you needed any more proof of that, this game tonight was that. Georgia is still a good team, but they aren't an elite team. And, when they beat Texas, maybe that was just one of those instances where it was a lightning in a bottle situation because if Ole Miss was to play Texas today, I would like Ole Miss to beat Ole Miss by at least 2 touchdowns in that game. So for Georgia, I don't even know if you can beat Georgia Tech or Tennessee next week with the way that you're playing. And we could see Georgia miss the playoffs this year, which is something that I don't think any of us could have saw coming. And another thing that I want to talk about, with Ole Miss is Lane Kiffin. This win means so much for him because I feel like it now stamps him as an elite coach in college football. I never considered Lane Kiffin to be an elite coach until this game happened, because he never really had a big win that made you go, oh yeah, like Lane Kiffin is that guy. And he got it today taking down Georgia. I don't care if this is a down Georgia team. Anytime you take down Georgia, it's tough to do, because this team just has a lot of resiliency. They always are going to fight until the final whistle gets blown. And for Ole Miss to just kick their butt like this was really impressive. And Lane Kiffin is my favorite head coach in college football. I miss you so much down here in Boca Raton, my brother, because you are the best thing that ever happened to my alma mater, Florida Atlantic University, because ever since Ole Miss took Lane Kiffin from FAU, it's been downhill ever since. And if Lane Kiffin ever wants to come back and coach some college football in Florida, you should ignore FSU, ignore Florida, ignore UCF, come back to Boca, man. We miss you so bad down here. Like, my Owls, man, we got Tom Herman as our head coach now. Like, Lane Kiffin was a blessing to FAU football, and I can't reiterate that enough. So I'm glad to see him finally getting the success that he deserves at Ole Miss. And as long as they win out, they will be a lock to get into the 12-team college football playoffs. Some people are wondering, how much damage can they do in the playoffs? I think they can beat anybody outside of the SEC. Like, the only teams I don't think Ole Miss could beat are Oregon and Texas. Everybody else, I think they got a fair shot at beating. I see them being able to go toe-to-toe with Ohio State with how questionable their trench play has been on the O-line, the D-line. I can see them beating Tennessee. I can see them beating whoever they got to play from the Big 12. Ole Miss is a really good team. They beat Penn State in the Peach Bowl last year, if I'm not mistaken, as well.